All right, welcome back to the podcast. Welcome back to Theory and Theology. On this podcast, we talk about cultures, spirituality, religion, different belief systems. This episode, as well as a few others, I've put a trigger warning on them. So those who are not interested in hearing about trauma, depression, psychological problems, abuse, you probably don't want to listen any further past this, and please feel free to check out past episodes or different episodes that do not deal with these topics. I'll post some others that aren't all on this topic, but for now I'm doing a series on this. So, alright, so we were previously talking about generational curses, generational trauma, generational sin, based on Eli Yoder's story about being in the Amish community, in a community in Kenton, Ohio, and experiencing abuse and his father's suicide, as well as just a lot of the difficulties with being bullied and teased, and just mostly I wanted to talk about take it kind of like a level deeper on a lot of topics, how I broke it down into different topics that I noticed he mentioned. So previously I talked about just like the overview of his story. You can check out his story in that link that I previously posted. Generational curses, generational trauma, generational sin, I'm not so sure if those are all the same type of terminology. Eli Yoder talked about generational curse. That's what he was describing, the curses passed down. He says that they were able to track down anger issues of males from his father's side of the family up to 5 generations in the past. So he experienced abuse from his father. His father experienced abuse from Eli's grandfather. Eli's grandfather experienced abuse from the great grandfather, and then there were 2 generations before that who experienced abuse. Now, if you think about even history of the Amish church, now I don't know the exact years, but let me try to look that up real quick. So if I just Google search Amish, okay, well, if my phone doesn't freeze while I'm searching it, Google Amish church origins, excuse me. So where did it start? When did it start? So it says the Amish church started in Switzerland, and it says Alsatian Mennonite Anabaptists in 1693, led by Jacob Ammon. Those who followed Ammon became known as Amish. So it basically explains there was a schism, a break, split in the church between a group of Swiss and Alsatian Mennonite Anabaptists. So I don't know what those groups specifically are, but 1693. So Eli Yoder left the Amish church in 20, I don't know when, actually, but he got saved in the Christian religion in 2017. And, so yeah, 1693. And if you think about how a lot of, Amish left certain places because they were being persecuted, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm going to go out on a limb, is it on a limb or on a whim? I'm gonna just kind of put it out there that I would not put it past, historical trends to say that the Amish who were experiencing persecution of their communities and family and friends, they experienced trauma. Now, who experienced trauma before that, I don't really know, but I would assume that the people who were fleeing religious persecution, they experienced trauma. And the Amish were persecuted, burned at the stake, all kinds of things. I don't know the years on this, but so that generally explains, if you look at most of history, it's not uncommon to see that there are groups of people who experience a major issue going on, whether that's genocide or Holocaust or slavery or Western civilization coming in, trying to civilize, in quotes, in quotes, the savages, whatever that looks like. Those generations all experience trauma as like a whole during a certain period of time, right? And it's not even to account for different people who might have had like other kinds of mental issues, emotional issues going on that were unresolved, and raising families or taking care of someone who was dependent on them and not able to provide for them a safe environment, like without abuse, whether that's food or financial or just basic needs getting met, social interaction versus neglect, a safe environment, like physically, emotionally. Not every parent is equipped to really be raising kids, especially if they have those kind of issues. So we can look at, generational, as in like historical time periods where there were major events happening that were traumatizing for whole groups of people, as well as like smaller, not smaller as in they're not significant, but smaller as in like not whole groups of people experience one father abusing everybody. It's like that's usually specific to like a household or extended households, but not like the whole entire community, right? So if you think about this, when you have people who have experienced trauma and they become leaders, right? Or they were raised by people who were traumatizing them, or raised by people who were traumatized and were traumatizing the further generations, and then the next generation gets traumatized by that other generation, and now here comes this leader, right? That's an elder or whatever it may be, right? So one thing I wanted to focus on was the stories that others tell about elders. So for example, a lot of times there might be traumatic experiences going on, but people don't know. So, for example, in Eli Yoder's story, he was taught that his grandparents were evil because they left the Amish church. Now, when he went and could eventually, after he was, out of the Amish church, he started being in contact with his grandparents and learned a lot about their history. The history that the grandparents had experienced some form of trauma from that previous generation, from the great-grandparents' generation, and explained how they were, doing kind of, like one of the grandfathers was doing like some kind of gross sexual abusive stuff towards like a young family member who he was having an affair with his wife with, and became a chiropractor and started using his, position in that job to be like sexually abusing and molesting female, patients. So the stories that the elders were telling about the grandparents were that, they're evil, they left, and Eli never knew the information that his grandmother was, aware of that grandfather's, her husband's, negative actions and abusive ways. He was abusive towards his family, and she would report it, and the family never backed her up. The church never backed her up because women didn't really have a say, and they would just basically go to the man and say, did you do this? And then if the man said no and denied it, they would just take his word for it, and there was no real investigation or like observation of things. And of course, once the church leaders leave from that situation, of course the guy is going to be lashing out on his wife and family. And so they tried to silence her, but she left, right? So they were told, the family, the younger generations were told, oh, she left because she's evil, she's bad. So of course, when the people were Amish, they never would consult these other people who left that were in their families, because everyone was telling them, oh, she's bad, she's wrong, so they would never think, let me go ask grandma why she's not a part of this church. They would just assume she's evil, she's bad because she left the Amish. And so he never would have otherwise gotten this story. And so it's not really to make excuses for people. It's just saying, there is kind of this trend in some cultures about how people talk about elders, how they don't really maybe tell the full truth sometimes, and those people become protected, from the history of what they've done, because nobody in the younger generations knows, hey, grandpa was abusive towards dad, grandpa was abusive towards grandma. People don't really always talk about that. They say other stuff, and so they paint whoever they want in whatever light they want. So that's one thing with generational trauma that, kind of comes up often, where it is possible to trace the generations back and back and back, either to major events of a community or culture experiencing these negative major events as a whole, such as persecution or some genocide, those types of things, or it's possible to have family members that maybe had some kind of issue that were interfering negatively and abusing other younger generations, and then those generations in turn abuse the next generation when they start having kids, and so on. And if you think about it, like I mentioned before, like just kind of estimating, if his family, I think there were 10 kids. I don't know if he meant he had 10 siblings, or there were 10 siblings or 10 kids to his mother and father. So either there were 10 or 11 kids in his family. And he said that the parent side, the mom side, had, I don't remember how many siblings, but she had at least 12, like each of those siblings had at least 12 children. So, and then the father's side, there were 2 aunts and 2 uncles. No, sorry, the dad and 1 uncle, and then 2 aunts. And so that dad's side had less family members. The mom's side had a whole lot of family members. Probably they had over like 100 family members, between first cousins, aunts, uncles, parents. There were probably over 100 family members right there. And so if you think about that, and if all this abuse would have potentially been going on, how are all these people gonna then go and branch out and start having families and kids? How are they gonna treat their kids? Not everybody's Eli Yoder. Not everybody left and got the opportunity to experience forms of forgiving others and healing, and getting help for the past. And not saying that like everyone gets completely always better, or that everything improves 100%. There's still pain. There's still difficulty coping with stuff, but not everybody gets the help and isn't gonna be an abusive person. And so if you think about it that way, it's like, okay, well, not everybody's gonna get the help or have access to the help. And so a lot of people might still have those tendencies to continue those abusive ways. Now, I'm not putting these out here to talk badly about the Amish church. The Amish and Mennonites who I have met, were always like beautiful, nice people. But the reason why I like to talk about the Amish is because they really are a group that gets romanticized. Like on the surface, it seems like, how could anything ever be wrong? With a group of people that shields everybody from mainstream Western culture, and they're shielded from all the crap that the rest of us have to deal with the media and all this kind of stuff. And they're self-sufficient. They're not subjected to like too much of the other stuff. But it doesn't mean that a community is going to be perfect because of that. But it's I think when I first saw The Devil's Playground, that documentary, about Amish that are in Rumspringa, one of the first things that kind of stuck out to me was like one of the bishops or preachers or whatever his role was. He said, we have the same problems as the English community do. Like he mentioned things like, people having problems with drugs, people getting pregnant, maybe too early without an expected pregnancy, things like that. Like he mentioned those types of things, but he didn't mention the other types of things. But he did mention, we have all the same types of problems. But if someone were to repent of those things and get baptized into the Amish church and, say that they're going to stop doing that kind of stuff, then they would be accepted into the community. They never really talk about, what happens if, you've got some of this manipulation type stuff going on. So, I'm not trying to bash the Amish at all. I think it's a beautiful culture, beautiful religion. I really look up to those people who are in that culture. But I think it does show an extreme side. It shows an extreme side of, what happened, what could potentially happen when you have a lot of trauma related experiences, and then it's also insulated. You're not really getting any outside influences. You're not interacting with people outside of your community as much, and then if you are, you're not depending on them, and so you rarely would likely run across somebody who says oh, like, the thing that you're dealing with or whatever's going on with that cultural thing, that is very that sounds very stressful. Like, people don't usually speak to that. They don't always speak to that. So that's something that I've kind of noticed. Like, you don't usually see that all the time. So yeah, that's kind of just one thing. And so yeah, that's about all I have to say about that topic. But thanks for listening.